Hey, it's Sam, and I'm making this quick video today to describe and discuss our blind spots, unconscious behaviors, and debilitating patterns and projections that we get into in our life. Now, this is from an upcoming course on shadows, blind spots, and confusion, and seeing through those things using astrology, where we're going to find out how to navigate the darkness and the dark spots in life by examining Vedic astrology and all of the planetary principles. This is going to be a great class, so much now, especially in modern spiritual circles, as we look to understand ourselves better, understand our patterns, understand our relationships, the things we're stuck in. We can get into some real kind of sort of dead ends where we can even take something like astrology, which teaches us how to be liberated from our deadening routines and our unconscious patterns. And it can actually sort of turn these things that everyone, has a tendency to do. We all have the same tendencies, but really kind of turn it into even a more polarizing kind of blind state. And I definitely see quite a bit of this going on now. So today I'm going to talk about each of the planets. This is an outline that I'm putting together for the upcoming course on shadows, blind spots, and confusion. And again, I just really want people to understand that the benefit of this examination is really going to be that we can really understand that we can develop more compassion for ourselves and for each other, and shine that light of Jyotish wisdom into those dark corners of our mind and psyche. When we start to examine these planetary forces as forces we all have, we are all lashing out and exhibiting unconscious behavior from time to time, since we're all formed by the planets and their energies. So we have to analyze these planetary forces if we want to understand these things. So I do think it's the best use of Vedic astrology, as it can really help us diffuse the polarizing dramas that we get into as we interact with each other and try to work through the karma that we have, both as individuals and as we interact with each other as individuals. So again, I'm just going to briefly go over some of these attributes. Now, again, these are going to be some of the qualities. In the weekend course, I'm going to go deeper into what leads to a more unconscious, let's say, sun, like the blind spots and the unconscious behavior. What makes it so that the sun is going to be acting that way? What are some of the conditions on the sun that's going to bring more of that quality out? What brings out more of the moon's blind spots and unconsciousness? Regardless, even if someone has the greatest sun ever, like it's as good as it can be, it's still going to, from time to time, exhibit these blind spots, unconscious behaviors and whatnot, because it's tendencies that we all have. It's just the planets that are less unconscious do it less, and we tend to learn from those things a little bit more. But we all have these tendencies. So with the sun, the real blind spot and unconscious sort of pattern is where we become perhaps overly self-important. We think we're more important than we are, like in people's minds and lives. We have a sort of counterfeit power, where instead of feeling the power within, we try to take the power from someone else. We sort of dominate. There's a sort of domination structure. It also leads to, again, the shadow side of that is it really comes from a lack of confidence, and which leads to a sort of tyrant kind of behavior. Again, you could see how, even though it might sound overly self-important and lack of confidence, well, which one is it? Well, they're actually kind of the same thing, but a kind of shadow of each other. And again, one of the themes that we're going to be talking about in the weekend is that whole concept of the shadow and what that shadowy thing is, that shadowy projection, right? Because what we do is we wind up projecting that sort of shadowy quality. There's a shadow of blindness, or there's a shadow that's created in a sort of blinding sense, that when the sun has that difficulty, it's a lack of self-confidence that gets overly done. Then there's an overt sense of self-importance, right? So you can see that even though one might look like it's a lack of confidence, one might look like it's overconfidence, it comes from the same kind of blind spot, you might say, the same kind of like wound even, right? So the key to it is a weak self-image causes us to steal others' power and dominate them or want to dominate them. This is really the kind of blind spot of the sun. So what we're really going to get to in the weekend is how to get down and really understand what is making for this weird behavior, right? Because when with the sun, it's going to vacillate between, overconfidence, overimportance, but it's coming as an overcompensation for not feeling significant, for feeling insignificant and lacking confidence is what you're really going to see. So that's going to be that sort of blind spot and that sort of polarizing quality. So this is the thing to keep in mind, even just as a theme about each one of the planets. When it's weak and the things that weaken it, and different things weaken it in different ways. Of course, this is what I'm going to talk about in the course, how you can tell exactly what the kind of what the weak spot is in each one of the planets, right? You can obviously see it in your chart because each planet weakens another one in a specific way. They all tend to do it in a very specific way. But what's underneath it all? This is what's underneath it all. So the moon winds up being a sort of codependent, whiny, guilt-tripping behavior, smothering energy, and clinging. Again, this is the moon when it's not embodied in a healthy way. It has that sort of codependent longing. It can turn into a kind of whining. Oh, I'm always so sad. And we really project this outward onto others. Think of all of this as like what we project onto others. The moon is, you're always hurting my feelings. My feelings are always hurt, and you're doing it. Everything you do hurts me. And whining, guilt tripping. You're doing this to me. You did it to me. Oh, I'm always so hurt. Everybody's hurting me so much, right? And that leads to a kind of smothering and clinging as well, because making others responsible for how you feel is a smothering kind of energy. And then when you do get around people, it's like, oh, you're going to make me happy. Okay, please don't go. Again, that's that codependent clinging, but you can see it's coming from the same source, even though, and sometimes it's even sort of pushing away, right? That kind of, this sort of, oh, I'm okay, just leave me alone, and then go off and then guilt trip because the person went off by themselves or whatever it might be. So again, it's a lack of connection to authentic love leads to emotional manipulation and dramas with the moon. Again, these are very quick sort of, quick sentences, but you get the feeling because the moon is that embodied connection to the heart, deeper than the emotions, deeper than needing other people or feeling like other people are our source of love and connection. Just like with the sun, the authentic power of the sun is that embodied power that doesn't need to dominate others because it's coming from within us. When it doesn't feel like it's emanating from within us, we try to grab some of it outside and make ourselves big and significant, right? So, and again, each planet, like for example, the sun can have a way, let's say Venus can have a way of weakening the sun and contributing to a weak self-image, or so can Jupiter, so can Saturn, like all of them can. It's not just, quote, the bad ones. They all can have a way and they all have an effect. And when the effect is a negative effect, it brings out versions of this seed weakness. This is what I want you to understand. And we're going to break down all the planets, all the signs, houses, the lunar nodes, other things that analyze these things, specifically like the Avashtas and other planetary conditions as well. So Mars can lead to tantrums, helplessness and powerlessness, a lack of discipline, overt or passive aggression. So again, when Mars is operating through that kind of blind, unconscious behavior and projection, Again, it's like tantrums, like, oh, I'll show you. Again, it's similar to the sun, but it's not about domination in a larger sense. It's about fighting. It's about confrontation. Mars works through a conflict. Right now, we're going to have a conflict right now. And, but it also, again, one thing is a tantrum and one thing is helplessness and powerlessness. You can see how they're the same thing. Look at when a child has a tantrum, it's because they feel powerlessness. So how do I get power? I have a tantrum. If you won't pay attention to me this way, maybe you'll pay attention to me if I hold my breath, or if I bang my head against the wall, or if I have a tantrum. Now you'll pay attention to me. See, this is the way the ego behaves. If it can't get attention for something good, it'll get attention for something bad. But the ego wants attention. And Mars is that, I'll show you, now you'll pay attention to me. If I, set the house on fire, or if I argue with you, or if I start accusing you of something, now you're paying attention to me. So again, it's that unconscious aggression. And it's because lacking the courage to face our own weaknesses, we instead try to change others by fighting and confrontation with them. So again, when Mars is powerful, we realize that it's my weakness, my jealousy and my negative, toxic emotions that are hard to hold. It's too hard for me to own it. I need to attack somebody for it. You did it. And we can justify it, and it's right and wrong, a sense of right and wrong. That's what Mars gets all uppity about. It's the principle of the thing. You shouldn't do that, and or should and shouldn't. So again, lacking the courage to face our own weaknesses, we instead try to change others by fighting and confrontation with them, getting into power struggles. So again, this is the unconscious Mars. Again, we all do all of this. It's not like, oh, this person does that. We all do it. I said jealous because it's one of the big ways. Jealousy has a lot of that kind of wrapped up in it. It's, I'm significant. I'm the most important person. Your friendship with someone else is part of my property. I get to tell you how you should do it, and I get to accuse you. I don't know, whatever it might be. But there's other kinds of things, of course, other kinds of domination, other kinds of, holding people's money or anything where we got power over someone and we are sort of in a sort of power struggle with them. A lot of that is Mars energy, right? Mars is that confrontation. And the tantrum is a big part of it. Mercury, the lying, misusing language to manipulate, confusion with details, impractical, overwhelmed. Again, Mercury is where we're trying to organize everything correctly and do everything in the right measure, not get overwhelmed with all the details, try to figure things out with a confused. So the real key with Mercury is this, the real blind spots and the real sort of negative unconsciousness with Mercury is with a confused story in our mind, we damage our credibility by confusing or misleading speech, unable to explain ourselves, what we do, or what we believe. So understand this, Mercury is very much about it's about the words you say. And when Mercury is unconscious, and the unconscious quality of Mercury is like, we don't really know what we think. And language and words aren't used to speak clearly and correctly and speak the truth and tell the truth and be accurate. We're kind of confused. Words become tools to try to get what we want rather than to be honest and be clear. Meanwhile, when we do that, once somebody sees that we're not telling the truth, it doesn't take much. Somebody doesn't tell you the truth once or twice, you're not going to believe them. It's going to be hard for you to believe them, hardly ever, right? Or anything that they say. When we say something, let's say that we believe in some, like right now we have all the conspiracy theories in the world. Someone believes all this stuff and then you get them to explain it. And what they say is a lot of mumbo jumbo. Then you stop respecting what they say because you can tell they're not really thinking straight. They're not thinking clearly. So we wind up then not trusting our own kind of story, right? And many times the Mercury problem, more than anything, the way we experience it is people don't feel respected for what they say. People don't feel listened to. People don't feel like that they're a good communicator. They don't feel like that because they often aren't. And the reason Others don't listen to what they say, and it's painful when someone doesn't listen to what we have to say. When people dismiss our words and think we're just full of it because we say things that don't make sense, because we're lying to ourselves. The details are confused. We're not being honest, literally, and we sort of get marginalized. So again, that's the real kind of crisis of Mercury when it's unconscious. And again, so the things that will promote that, we'll also talk about. Why is it that people respond to your words a certain way? Well, because you say things before you really know what you're talking about, right? It's a big one, right? So that's the kind of darkness, sort of unconsciousness of Mercury, and then we can sort of project that out and think, well, everybody, we're all confused. None of us really know anything, and none of us like, okay. It sort of compounds itself. So Jupiter, Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, they start to get a little more and more complex as the planets get more nuanced. Jupiter, the unconscious sort of projections and whatnot of Jupiter comes from, it really show a sort of lack of hope, can show fanaticism, atheism, materialisticness, like a sort of a materialistic nature, and greed, also spiritual bypassing, rigid orthodoxy. Jupiter is what we believe, and our beliefs and how they take us to someplace big. But again, it can just lead to blind faith if we're not careful. So the real key with Jupiter is clinging to beliefs or teachings that are corrupt. Again, we all believe something, but it might be something very corrupt or something we don't understand. We reinforce a worldview that is not really uplifting, but instead revolves around materiality or rigid dogma, following teachers who are unworthy and exploit us. Again, these are big, because Jupiter is what we believe. Look at all the stuff people believe. How many have good belief systems that are based on dharma and truth and practices and understanding and actual wisdom? How many things that people believe are actually aligned with that? And look at the suffering that comes because they believe things that aren't true, or they believe things that they don't understand. They can't even explain it. They don't understand it. They're just taking it on faith. And then what happens is when they then try to apply that belief system, they're kind of lost because they don't really understand it. And we don't live in those beliefs. We actually live in this world. We live more in the Mercury, explaining it to others and explaining it to ourselves, than we live in the Jupiter part, which is the belief itself. Mercury and Jupiter have a lot to do with this. Again, I use the thing about conspiracy theories or other beliefs that people have now. Notice people believe things that are just not taking them anywhere, they don't really know how any of it works. They just kind of believe it because it reinforces a sort of worldview. Then they try to explain it. It doesn't make sense. And it's just kind of, so the unconscious sort of blind spots of Jupiter revolve around these things. And it can also get into, again, that sort of rigid dogma where I just believe it and that's it. I don't want to hear anything else. I believe it. It's how I was raised and that's it. It's also a lot of bypassing, right? Where you can just say, I believe that thing. And if you don't, you're just not as good as me. This sort of piety is another blind spot of Jupiter. So again, we all do some version of this. Like I say, you can recognize some part of you in all of this. But again, some do it in a more extreme version. And when the planets are really difficult, you'll see the planets that are really difficult in someone's chart, these things will be much more important themes. Some people, let's say they have a really good Jupiter, this won't be as much of an issue. They'll have good faith. They'll recognize a good teaching, a good teacher. They won't be following weird politicians as gurus or thinking that some politics or some political figure or somebody like that is like, my inspiration or my sort of North Star. Again, that's just a Jupiter that is really out of whack, right? So then Venus, the sort of blindness of Venus that gets sort of projected out and that gets kind of confused, has to do with vanity, gossip, overtly sexual. There's hedonism, excessive people pleasing, and attention getting. again, this is the kind of negative, the sort of, what you'll notice is these are very worldly qualities, like when the planets become excessively worldly. That's a common theme, right? About, around all of these. And with Venus, it's very worldly because it's about enjoying life, other people. So the key is mistaking stimulation and outer forms of beauty for inner bliss and joy. That leads us on an exhausting journey where we eventually run out of time and sort of wonder, what happened? I'm now 60, 70 years old, 80 years old, and I've lived to try to, live a comfortable, happy life and make people around me happy and be happy and, find happiness. Again, Venus is about, finding happiness. A lot of the people that come to study astrology later in life, this is kind of what's happened. And often, in fact, it's often women who have lived their lives to please their family, or maybe husbands and partners. They were raised that way. Again, women are very related to their Venus. And then they're like, now finally going, okay, what happened? What, I thought this was supposed to be it. Why? Because Saturn is coming. Saturn is the last one, which we'll talk about in a minute. But again, the Venus projection, again, a lot of this is blind spots, but also things that we project onto others. We think everyone should be trying to be happy and we should all be polite. And of course we should, as far as, the way we act with each other, but that life is about, comforts and happiness. And we should all be doing that, when actually the bliss of the soul and finding happiness and beauty and joy in everything, that's the real nature of Venus. That's the highest Venus realized, is that it's not about just the material world, or especially other people. That's the biggest thing that Venus winds up, where we feel disillusioned, is we spend our whole life with other people, thinking that that's the point, which leads to Saturn. And the unconscious quality of Saturn can lead to things like bitterness, punishing behavior, clinging to past wounding, not letting go of the past, remembering all the stuff that was done to us, which also leads to dominating, controlling behavior, punishing behavior. Again, when people have Saturn that's somewhat damaged, they like punishing people. They like inflicting pain on them if they feel like they deserve it. You did this to me, now I'm going to punish you. I'm going to punish you for it. I want to see you suffer now because I suffered. Even if you didn't do anything, even if my expectation of you was disappointed and I got hurt, if I'm convinced you did it, I'm going to hurt you. I'm going to punish you. And I'm going to remember it. I'm going to remember it. I remember all the times I was hurt. And I'm not going to let go. I'm going to hang on to it. So again, these are the kinds of things that Saturn, and over time, as we get older, it gets more and more, it becomes more and more apparent and crucial that someone learns to let go of all that stuff, right? And that, again, the biggest thing is the real key to the Saturn sort of problem and pain is that the fear of death and growing up leads to a shallow, fear-based life where we take everything personally, remember every mistake and grievance, and stay stuck in a self-created prison. Like when Saturn is really dark, it can be like that. We're afraid of death and growing up and being mature. And that's not just death of our life, but of even letting go of things. It's hard to let go of things. And, we can just live on this kind of shallow level of fear, or Saturn's energy can be kind of shallow and just be fearful, just like fear-driven, where we take everything personally. Again, Saturn is where we remember all of the insecurities, and we remember every mistake that we made, that others make, every grievance, and it sort of piles up, and it keeps us stuck in this like sort of prison of our own, like, trying to like, again, sort of control things and not live in solitude. The real key to Saturn is that ability to be alone and to work through our salvation. and to find that stillness and peace and joy, and realize that everything that we get with others is a gift, to feel complete and whole within ourselves first. Then anything we have with others is just a sharing. It comes from a place of sharing and abundance. So again, in the course, I'm going to go over all these things in great detail. I just wanted to today talk about the planetary blind spots, unconscious behaviors, and projections. Didn't talk so much about the projections part. Again, I don't talk so much about that part, but the projection is just like however we feel or however we're living this energy, we project it onto others and assume that's what they're doing. Like, that's what it is. Like, if we're in this relationship with the sun, where it's overly self-important, counterfeit, power, domination, which comes from a lack of confidence. If that's how we feel, we're going to project that that's what others are doing to us. Every little thing that someone might do where they express a lot of confidence or they're very bold about something, we'll project onto them that, oh, you think you're so powerful. We'll project our lack of confidence onto them. We'll project our inner domination structure onto them and think they're trying to dominate us, when maybe they're just, that's not what they're doing. That's our projection onto them, because that's what we would do, because that's how we're living it. This is why you can really tell a person, this is why it's important to understand these concepts of projection and all of these things as concepts, and then use astrology to really unravel it specifically. But when someone comes at you with something, realize they're not seeing you the way you are. They're seeing you the way they are. You've heard that statement before, right? You're not seeing me the way I am. You're seeing me the way you are. That's what projection is. And you can really tell in situations, again, where something very neutral happens. Again, very neutral. Could be anything. And someone all of a sudden reads all of this into it. When someone reads a lot into a situation and they come at you with it, you're reading how they see it. So someone who is suspicious all the time that you're doing something to them. Again, suspicious, or just like always looking for the angle that you're trying to play. Oh, you're trying to do this. Oh, you're trying to do that. It's because that's what they're doing. It's because that's how they see everything, literally. Because they're always trying to play some angle. They're always thinking that you're sneaking around or doing this. It's because that's what they do. So they assume that's what you do. So that's what projection is. So again, it's important to understand and to just know that. And we do inherently know it. Someone becomes very untrustworthy when they start projecting all kinds of stuff onto us. There's something about it that just doesn't feel right. It's like, what are you doing? I didn't say that. I didn't do that. Again, I already talked about it a little bit one way I described it was with Mercury, right? Let's say someone starts, telling us something that's just this thing, and they start sort of projecting a difficult Mercury onto us. Oh, you probably think all this and that and this and that. And then we also find that they're not really being honest or truthful about a lot of things. We find out that they're not even telling us the truth about something that might have happened. And if you get down to it, they'll say something like, well, if I, I can't tell you how I really feel, because if I did that, then you would say that. So I can't say that. So instead I say this. And you're like, why don't you just say what's true? Again, so you'll find all of these kinds of projections based on, knowing where they're coming from is very important. And of course, knowing it in yourself, because we all do it. We're all strategic with language a little bit. Sometimes it's hard to be honest all the time. I know, because I'm too honest most of the time. My filter isn't very good. And by the way, it doesn't benefit me a lot of the time. People don't like it sometimes. They think I'm rude or mean. And by the way, I get their projection because I said something that was honest. It wasn't even brutally honest, because I'm usually not brutal about it, but it's honest. And if they don't I'll often get a projection back about how I'm this way or that way, because I was just honest with them about something. And again, I'll get their projection back. most of the time that's not the case. People that that, especially even people, often pay me to be honest with them. That's what I have to do as an astrologer or even as a teacher. They pay me to like help them learn something or understand something. But sometimes they you know, again, they don't want it. They actually don't want to hear it. That's why I have to be careful even with doing readings and consultations at times. And I've learned how to be gentle about that. But I also know there's a group of people that really they really don't want that. They want me to coddle them in some way. And their projection is that that's what I'm supposed to do. You're supposed to make me happy. I'm paying you to make me happy. And I'm like, actually, you're paying me to tell you the truth. So I have to discern those things before I do readings with people. And sometimes if I start to do a reading and I can tell that the person actually just wants me to make them happy, I'll stop the reading. It doesn't happen that often, but it doesn't happen now because I know how to filter this out. But so this is going to be a fascinating weekend, and I'm really looking forward to teaching it. I think you'll really like it. Shadows, blind spots, and confusion. I make it very affordable. It has a lot of value. You also get 2 bonus classes. One on relationships that was taught by Dr. Malini Iyer, and another on the lunar nodes, because both of these things we're also going to touch on and talk about because they're very important in this whole matrix as well. So check that out, Shadows, Blind Spots, and Confusion. Go ahead and register for that course, and we'll see you in the class.